Testing. Okay, folks. I'm going to ask you all to come forward and be part of our intimate gathering here.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'm Bruce Agnew with the PNWER Accelerator program. And I just want to make a couple comments before I turn over to Bets and Aaron to go through our the technical details of our AREA program. I think I guess I tip my hat, Matt, to you and leadership for thinking about piggybacking on the RDC conference. I think it was a brilliant move, and we just came from breakfast where we had our three stars, Delana and Shane and Cindy give a great presentation. I thought that was very, very helpful. So these are costly events, getting people in winter to these economic leadership conferences. So to the degree that we can get connected and network with this remarkable Resource Development Council has been very, very helpful. And I also thought the governor's staff presentation was very candid and very interesting and insightful. It's not that I was a chief of staff to a congressman one time. It's not that often where a staff person really talks politics and policy. And I thought it was very good. So this has been a great couple of days. We didn't have enough time upstairs to talk about the Accelerator program. So we're going to talk about it here because it is a big deal in PNWER. It is right now we're at $3.2 million and we have sustained funding through 2026. And we're in the throes of getting together and figuring out projects in the 5 states to submit for additional funding. And as Beth will talk about, what we try to do is figure out how the Build America Bureau funding, which is primarily focused on credit programs and loan guarantees, those kinds of things. And for a project, when we started the Accelerator, the conversation with potential projects, and we have 10 projects in 5 states right now, is, well, gee, I don't know about a loan program. How do we pay it back? I'd rather go for the grant, this BIL funding, which is $1.2 trillion over 5 years, is remarkable. Unfortunately, 1 out of 5 projects get grant money. And so the ability to kind of tuck in a credit program, if you've got some sort of revenue source that can pay the loan back, the terms of the loan in terms of how long it is and low interest rates, and low interest rates is a big deal because the interest rates remain stubbornly high. How it provides gap financing, how it can accelerate delivery of a project. In the case of the railroad infrastructure, it can actually provide the local match for a major capital project for a railroad, which is a big deal. So Bets and I went down to meet with the Alaska Railroad Corporation yesterday. It was really interesting. Bill O'Leary and Megan from their team. And it's a story where this is a public entity that has been successful in securing capital investments from 4 different grant programs in the BIL. And so our pitch was, do you have a project that could lend itself to perhaps a partnership using a credit program as part of your menu of financing options? And we talked a little bit, and we talked with Aaron about a Port of Whittier, which is a 12-mile spur off the main line to a cruise ship terminal that's being developed by Alaska Native Corporation. And it's a beautiful new terminal that serves as a community center for Whittier. And there's one problem. It doesn't have funding for charging for electric charging for the cruise ships. So how do we bring energy and transportation funding together with the corporation and the town of Whittier is something we're going to look into. And Aaron and I were talking, we have this, through our current funding, we have this great partnership with Alaska Municipal League. Two of our projects, Yakutat and Jakalov Dock, which they'll talk about, were good examples of us helping provide technical assistance. And that's the name of this session, is how do we provide technical assistance to these projects? So it's been a great partnership. We're looking forward to continuing our connections with Alaska, and the discussion yesterday or this morning was really important because we have existing transportation corridors. It's called the Marine Highway that connects Seattle Tacoma ports to Alaska ports, through cruise ships, through the Alaska Marine Highway, BC ferries, Washington State Ferry interconnection. We have the supply chain with Toad and AML and Linden transporting provisions from Tacoma up to Alaska ports. And we have the cruise industry, which has this alliance trying to provide electric charging to ports up and down the cruise ship corridor. So we have this robust existing corridor that goes back north to Alaska and the Klondike Gold Rush and all that. Then we have this really exciting, what we talked about yesterday, what I've dubbed kind of the Northwest Energy and Security Corridor that would connect, Montana and Idaho and Alberta and Yukon and Northwest Territories into Alaska Tidewater. And that's an emerging, exciting new corridor. So PNWER is covering all bases here. I think we've got a PowerPoint. I'm going to turn over to Beth to go into greater detail about our projects. I just will note that the Regional Accelerator Program actually predates the bipartisan infrastructure bill. It actually came about in 2015 under the previous FAST Act. The problem was it was authorized, but there was no money put into the program. So we went to Senator Patty Murray, who's the current chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. And at that time, Senator Susan Collins from Maine, who is the ranking minority member, and we asked him to put some money in this fledgling program. And they did. And then we competed. We got, it was, I think, $12 million at first. I can't remember, but we were one of 5 accelerators. And we worked on some Northwest Seaport projects, electrified drayage trucks. We worked on a highway rail grade separation project in Spokane. And because we were successful, they gave us a second round of funding. That's where we are now. We have 10 projects in 5 states. We're going to talk about that. But the Bureau is very interesting because it's part of US DOT, and its prime mission is to promote credit programs. And the TIFIA and RIF type loans and the private activity bonds have been around for 25 years. They predate the infrastructure bill, and they will, which the infrastructure bill ends in September of 2026. So as we look forward, the credit programs are a mainstay, and they will continue to be. So the other thing that the Bureau does, and that we're still kind of exploring, is that it serves, we serve as a kind of an informal field office to the Bureau to explain these credit and grant programs to small jurisdictions, tribal nations, small communities. But it also serves as an opportunity for these programs. It's a portal to the divisions within the U.S. Department of Transportation. You have federal highways, federal railroad, the Maritime Administration, which is involved in a lot of issues with Alaska ports. You even have the FAA involved in airports. So the thinking is that PNWER, the accelerator, can help local jurisdictions navigate the infrastructure bill, which program might work, and which division of DOT might work. The other thing that the accelerator is doing in terms of a political and policy matter is what we call systems integration. And this is challenging territory. The notion is that we have this robust, traditionally funded transportation system, railroads, airports, highways, bridges, all these kind of connective arteries in our region. And then we have this policy that we're going to decarbonize this system. So turning a truck stop that, dispenses diesel fuel into a hydrogen fueling facility or electric charging station for both local trucks and long haul trucks. That's an exciting new concept, the truck stop of the future or the port terminal of the future, which is electrified. But how do you connect these siloed funds within the Department of Energy or EPA and USDOT is a challenge. And PNWER is a perfect laboratory to do that. So we're very excited about the Accelerator program. I think one of the slides we have will, and I can talk about it when it comes up, the way we're going to govern this incredibly important program is through legislators, the mid-level of government. That's the governing body of PNWER. So what we're proposing is to bring the leaders of the transportation and energy committees within the 5 Northwest states together. And you heard Cindy talk about Lehigh. Lehigh has been a fabulously successful opportunity for Republican and Democratic legislators. We have 2 blue states and 3 red states, so it's important that we work together to learn all about energy. Energy 101. It's a 60-hour boot camp, and we have 5 members of Congress that are graduates of Lehigh. It's very successful. Well, we'd like to do this similar type activity as Lehigh in terms of blending transportation energy. The difference is, whereas Lehigh is twice a year and concentrated tutorials, we have real projects and corridors and gateways that we'll talk about today that we provide technical assistance to. So we incubate, we accelerate, we integrate energy and transportation systems. So I'm excited about the effort we have. We also, I should mention, our what we call Build Northwest Council will have a parallel private sector Build Northwest Council, which will have leading executives, industry executives from energy, transportation, engineering, finance, because PNWER is all about matching private capital and public infrastructure, advising legislators about successful case studies of public-private partnerships, for instance, or blending of credit and grant programs and risk management, these very difficult technical issues when you try to put the financing together. So that is something that you'll be hearing more about. We hope to have a major session at our Bellevue Summit with the Build Northwest Council. And then I think we got, let's see, slideshow. So I'm going to turn it over to Bets to kind of go through the details of our program. And then we're delighted to have Aaron here from our really good partner, the Alaska Municipal League, to talk about the challenges of explaining how you apply for a grant or credit program for a small community in Alaska. Beth?
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Beth Meyer. I'm the Assistant Director for PNWER's Regional Infrastructure Accelerator Program. If I can get the next slide, please. Great. So Bruce kind of touched on this a bit, but one of the things that the PNWER REA does is we have 4 program areas. The first is the Build Northwest Center of Excellence, which Bruce got into just now. High performance rail, that's all of our rail focused work. We have zero emission commercial corridors. So that's some of our hydrogen work. Basically, how do we decarbonize our freight system? And this last one is critical connections. And this is really how can we help support communities that have these really critical infrastructure projects that connect them to the outside world, but can be pretty difficult to fund and might not have the resources to really put together a really compelling grant application, for example. So a lot of our work in this round of funding, the second round of funding, is in collaboration with subrecipient organizations. And so Alaska Municipal League is one of our subrecipient organizations. And basically what that allows us to do is, if PNWER is the field office for the Bureau, our subrecipients are almost subfield offices, right? Part of what is really difficult about the TIFIA and RIF finance programs that USDOT has is that they're really complicated. They're pretty difficult to use. And I don't know if you've ever tried to talk to someone in accounting and finance about finance programs, but it can be very complicated very quickly. And the number of times I've had to look at someone from the Bureau and be like, I really need you to explain this to me like I'm 5. It's happened more than once, right? So if we have these really great programs at DOT that really do have benefits for communities, but there's this big information gap in how people are actually able to access it, then that's a problem. And that's part of what we as an RIA are kind of designed to help address. And so over the next 2 years, we're working with Alaska Municipal League to develop this TIFIA and RIF action plan for Alaska. And we're also providing them some funding to work a little bit more with the city and borough of Yakutat, which has a couple of different infrastructure projects that we think that if they're bundled together might be a good candidate for TIFIA finance. So next slide, please. So there's a lot of information here, but TIFIA and RIF are the loan programs that the RIAs work with through the Build America Bureau. An easy way to think about this is that if it's a surface transportation project, then it's going to be a TIFIA loan. And if it's a railroad project and has anything to do with a railroad, it becomes a RIF loan. They're set up differently. One of the really cool things about RIF is that RIF loans can count as local match. So for our Canadians, when you have infrastructure projects that receive federal funding from the US government, the government basically wants to make sure that you have some skin in the game. So they require a 20% match, local match. For communities, that can really be a tricky proposition. And one of the problems we have across the US is that our infrastructure is failing quickly. And there's just not enough grant dollars to fix it all and make sure that we have really robust transportation systems for our economy. So the benefit of something like RIF is that a community can take out a loan and use that loan as the local match to sort of pay back over time that local match portion instead of needing to come up with it up front. And part of what that does is it allows the project to move a lot more quickly because then the community isn't, waiting to save several years to actually get that local match together. They can say, here's how we're going to repay this loan over time. And then they can really get moving on these projects. And I'll talk about some examples a little bit later. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is a little bit more about the programs. And again, one of the benefits of getting these loans from DOT is that they have relatively low interest rates. Next slide, please. And this is especially true of projects in rural areas. And DOT has different definitions of what is and isn't rural depending on the program that you're talking about. But under this definition, almost the entire state of Alaska counts as rural except for Anchorage. And part of what that means is that if a community was to use TIFIA financing for a project, they would be eligible to have, they would borrow their money basically at 2.23%, which I don't know if anyone's taken on a loan recently, but that is a really good rate with today's economy. So part of, again, what we're trying to do as an RIA is sort of match this information and these programs to potential projects that could actually use them and really benefit from these from this interest rate and things like that. Next slide, please. This is a little bit of the whole process of what it looks like to actually go through the Bureau's loan application process. And that star there is really where a lot of that technical assistance lives. And just a kind of a side note on technical assistance, it's a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot recently, especially after the passage of BIL. And it's kind of a nebulous thing, right? So for us as an accelerator, part of what we believe technical assistance to be is helping close information gaps between communities and where they are and where they want to be. Because what we find a lot of times is that especially smaller communities with big projects don't necessarily have the staff or the on-staff expertise or the time is a big one, to be able to really navigate through this really complex system effectively. And so technical assistance, having outside folks basically be sponsored to come in and give them that assistance can be a really good way to ensure that we have a robust transportation system where smaller communities, rural communities, disadvantaged communities, and tribal nations are not left behind. Next slide. So in our cooperation with Alaska Municipal League, we are going to be creating a TIFIA and RIF action plan for Alaska. And as I was saying earlier, a lot of that's going to be really focused on developing information and materials for smaller jurisdictions, local governments, to really help them understand not just TIFIA and RIF, but innovative finance as a whole, and how that might be able to help their project move forward a little bit more quickly. Because my other favorite thing to say is that the cheapest time to build something is today. And actually the cheapest time was probably to have built it yesterday, right? Things are not going down in price. And so the faster you can get things built, the cheaper it's going to be for your community over time. So this is really going to be what I'm working with Aaron's team on at AML. They're phenomenal. We're really excited to have this partnership. Next slide, please. And we have already had a couple of sessions with AML about the TIFIA and RIF programs, and the feedback that we've gotten from folks in Alaska has been really illuminating, but not necessarily surprising. There has not been to date a TIFIA or a RIF loan executed in the state of Alaska. I believe there might be one in the pipeline, but for the most part, none have been closed at above the 49th parallel. So part of what we're looking at, next slide, please, is how can we create these resources, spread this information, and also report back to the Build America Bureau about the things that don't work well in the way that their programs are designed, and also take that to Congress so that they can fix these problems and make these make TIFIA and RIF more accessible to more people to move projects forward. So I'm going to get into some case studies a little bit later, but for now, I think I'm going to hand it over to Aaron.
Thank you. All right. It is great to be here. Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Reinders. I'm the Director of Infrastructure Development with the Alaska Municipal League, which is short, we call it AML. And for those in the room from Alaska, it's the other AML, not the Alaska Marine Lines, but the Alaska Municipal League. Depending on who you talk to, they identify with one or the other typically. So I need to be very clear, Alaska Municipal League. So I'm going to go over a lot about what the Alaska Municipal League is up to, particularly in the infrastructure space, and how we are working to support local communities throughout the state. And I then will also touch on what AML's involvement is with this TIFIA Action Plan for the state and how that fits in with our work that we've been doing for quite some time. So next slide, please. All right, so a little bit about AML. I promise this looked larger on my monitor this morning, but the Alaska Municipal League is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, statewide member organization of 165 cities, boroughs, and unified municipalities. So we represent over 97% of Alaska's residents. Originally organized in 1950, the League of Alaska Cities became the Alaska Municipal League in 1962 when boroughs joined the league. So we're really one of the only leagues throughout the country that represents both the cities and boroughs or county equivalents. So next slide, please. So our mission is to represent the unified voice of Alaska's local governments to successfully influence state and federal decision-making, help to build consensus and partnerships to address Alaska's challenges, and to provide training and joint services that really help to strengthen Alaska's local governments. So AML has really picked up steam in response to our board direction and really the call of our members to focus on maximizing the benefit to our state from the historic funding opportunities in the infrastructure space. So really we've grown from probably about a staff of 5 to 6 to about 30 within the last 2 years. So it has been an amazing, exciting time. And really that was initially really kind of spurred on by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, BIL or IJA for short. So next slide, please. So basically, this is the what and why to our response. I love some logic models. So when I got hired on by AML about 2 years ago, I was like, I need to get this straight in my brain. So I built this a couple years ago. So overarching goals, really to maximize the benefit to Alaska and foster statewide collaboration, especially with all these opportunities coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law. We really wanted to help position local governments for success by being resource for partnerships, information, and guidance. We did make some assumptions that we could do this through our own research and learning, collaborating with our partners, hosting learning and networking and conference events, identifying opportunities for shared services, informing and engaging with our membership. And as always, to be flexible and adaptive as time moves on. So next. Oh, not actually, next slide, back up, sorry. So some medium-term results is that communities would be applying for and managing opportunities that improve infrastructure in their communities. Partnerships and collaborative opportunities would be solidified and creating competitive grant application. Some longer term results or outcomes Alaska's local governments are successful in obtaining and managing these grants and really starting to meet the needs of the communities that they're home to. Also, that relationships and regional approaches continue to expand in ways that benefit all Alaskans. Now the next slide. So how can AML think about our approach as we respond to working to these goals? So we can augment capacity through grant writing and project management. We can increase competitiveness through bundled applications and organizing data so it's easily accessible and usable. We can improve community conditions through assisting in the delivery of funds and projects themselves. We can strengthen local governments by providing connections with tools and services. So next slide. So how does our approach impact the communities and what are the outcomes of some of these approaches? So we've got a mixture of outreach and information sharing. So in the ways of emails and information hubs, websites, and I host a weekly infrastructure office hour with AML and members and anybody else who's interested. We have access to training and technical assistance, so connections to specialists, training opportunities, governance assistance, cohort support. I imagine we have, and I imagine more of these are going to be growing the more we've gotten some successful awards. And so through those projects, we're actually creating more and more cohorts of local governments, but some that we have already is the Alaska Water Infrastructure Navigation Center, Thriving Communities. We also have one that's focused in on Safe Streets for All. So we had a lot of successful grant applications throughout the state. And so everybody's navigating this new space together. So we just have a working group and we meet once a week and kind of share some ideas and how progress is being made there. And we also offer direct support. So grant writing is one prime example of that. All right, so next slide. So this is a sampling of our outcomes. So we are growing in our understanding of the need in developing and strengthening relationships, and successful applications are being submitted, including those by AML directly, also AML supporting different local governments and state applications. The map here highlights some communities and programs. It's just a sampling that AML is directly involved with. Alaska Water Infrastructure Financial Navigation Center, which is a mouthful, is one of those. That's an EPA funded program. Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant from DOE, the competitive block grant is another. So we had one local government apply, but it was really on behalf of 8 local governments for energy audits for several of their community facilities. So we'll be managing that grant on behalf of those 8 communities. And then also Energy Shed Communities, which is a DOE program. All right, next slide. So what when we talk about infrastructure, especially in the light of Bill Ija, It's easy to really focus in on grant application development and maybe a little bit of planning and prioritization, and a little bit on award and partnership and match. And I think that that has really been an important step and focus, and we need to continue doing that. But as more and more awards are coming in and being announced and being successful, we're trying to lean into those responses to the question of, great, we've got the award, now what? So that now what is kind of what we're reaching to try to address and support now. So procurement and workforce development, project management, reporting requirements. So if you've already got a capacity challenge, reporting requirements only add to that. O&M, asset management is something that we already really have started a lot of training on, and I've just got off the phone earlier today with some of our asset management consultants that we have on board. So if we've already got these assets, these infrastructure assets, we're now adding to those infrastructure assets. We need to kind of think about how we're going to sustain those moving forward. And how we can best make those decisions and support our decision makers. So asset management is a huge effort that we're into right now. All right, next slide. So infrastructure is a huge topic. So we like to break them up into different buckets. So AML is working in all of these spaces. So broadband, which includes cybersecurity in my mind. Also AML had helped to develop the digital equity plan and is now serving as the fiscal sponsor for the Digital Equity Coalition of Alaska. Energy, we are doing a lot of work in the energy space. We've partnered with the Denali Commission and DOE's Arctic Energy Office for an Arctic Energy Ambassador program to really help support energy projects throughout the state. Resilience, one example is that we are currently supporting, with the help of the Denali Commission, 40 applications for EPA's Community Change Grant, water and wastewater. I already talked about our EPA, we're an EPA technical assistance provider through our, I always get the acronym wrong, but the Alaska Water Finance Assistance Center or something such as that. But then lots of work in the transportation space. We work really closely with our state DOT. We have a signed memorandum of understanding that has been in place for 2+ years now. And we work really closely to support state projects and also get their support and working on local government applications as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that transportation effort in a few slides. So next slide. So a lot of work on capacity building, so across all of those buckets. So the scale and scope of this federal funding infrastructure opportunities is quite immense and can be overwhelming, especially for our smaller and more remote communities. So we work on supporting local and tribal governments in locating, applying, and reporting and compliance for grant applications. We're directly or indirectly facilitating grant writing support and coordinating information and sharing and exchanging, like the office hours that I've already mentioned, but also AK federal funding site and our infrastructure symposium, which we have on an annual basis now. So next slide. All right, so here's a little bit about what AML is doing in the transportation space. So currently we're developing 21 safety action plans as part of Safe Streets for All program. So 21 communities throughout the state will be getting a safety action plan. We partnered with the AEA to work on EV development and deployment throughout the state. And like I've said, lots of work with the state DOT. So we have a transportation hub, which I'll speak a little bit about. But then also we're working on some equity planning and thriving communities in partnership with the state DOT. So next slide. This is a little bit about our AK federal funding site. So this was developed in partnership with the Alaska Infrastructure Coordinating Committee, which is AML, also the state of Alaska, University of Alaska, Denali Commission, and the Alaska Federation of Natives, to name a few. And it contains a host of information and trainings and links to different resources, as well as our transportation hub and energy hub. Next slide. So I mentioned the transportation hub. This is a map that shows what transportation, where the location of the transportation projects are. So this hub is hosted by the state DOT, but Alaska Municipal League has the back access to look at this information. These are projects that have been submitted by state, local, and tribal governments. And so this hub includes an intake form and project evaluation process and mapping, as you can see, where staff, both state DOT and Alaska Municipal League, can evaluate projects for relevancy for the RIA effort led by PNWER. So as several of us know, Alaska Municipal League has supported grant applications for communities across the state, especially with ports and harbors, bridges, rail crossings, fish passage, and surface transportation. So this effort with the Accelerator program really is a natural and great next step. So next slide. I'm not really going to get into this. I think Bets did a great job giving an overview here, but so this is just a little bit about, I think some of the key takeaways here are the critical connections that PNWER's Accelerator program focuses in on. So really identifying the critical access to communities through bridges and ports and airports and ferry systems, and really kind of thinking about the connective infrastructure that we might be able to explore and support through TIFIA and RIF, because it can get very complicated very quickly. And we've already talked about some capacity issues for communities. So what does AML doing in this space? So next slide. So Alaska Municipal League is working with PNWER to assist communities in identifying, understanding, and navigating the best fit funding solutions for their infrastructure projects. AML will enhance the RIA in ongoing work with the transportation hub and identified transportation projects. We'll focus in on capacity building. So provide project planning, project bundling analysis, funding analysis, some technical assistance in the terms of really working closely with local governments, and then also contractor support. So looking to support in additional activities like the benefit cost analysis or feasibility studies and compliance analysis. So next slide. So this is one example, and Bet's kind of touched on this one already, but this is a Yakutat example. So through PNWER, so this is really what this could look like in real life in a community, right? So through PNWER's RIA Critical Connections Initiative and Focus, this potential bundle of transportation infrastructure projects in Yakutat is a potential candidate for innovative financing. So the approach here is to bundle these transportation infrastructure projects that contribute to economic development and bolster multiple industries, including commercial fishing and tourism. So in this Yakutat bundle example, we're talking about a small boat harbor, roadway improvement, and the expansion of a multi-purpose dock. So really all together, it makes for a compelling and impactful project and narrative to be able to communicate. So that is what I've got. I'll go ahead and hand it back over.
Thanks. Well, that was excellent. Do you have any other comments? I wanted to wrap up a little bit. Go ahead.
So 15 minutes. I have some slides on case studies.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Sorry, we didn't rehearse this, so flying by the seat of our pants.
It's more fun that way. Thank you so much, Erin. This is, I always really appreciate your presentations, and it's really great having AML as a partner. And I did want to spend a little bit more time on that transportation hub, and maybe later we can have you talk a bit about how that actually came to be, because I cannot understate the importance of having this database between Alaska Department of Transportation and Alaska Municipal League, which works really closely with the cities and boroughs, because that is not actually anything that we see in our other states. And so to know that there's a database, not of like a formal every 5 years, easily outdated, big state study of projects, but projects from communities that just upload them to the portal, can make changes as needed, where both the state DOT and the folks who are actually working with these communities hand in hand can access that information is really, really impressive. And I think could potentially be a good model for our other states to look into. So I don't know if you have any other comments on that.
I want to be respectful of time, but I will say that it allows for us not only to see one project that one community is interested in, but it allows us to see kind of trends and bundling opportunities that I think together make a much more compelling story. And one example that I think I will always bring up are board roads. So Reconnecting Communities Grant, which is a DOT grant program, often thought of as a more urban grant program, really breaking down barriers that are really restricting community connections for folks. But we were actually able to see there are some boardwalk communities within Alaska that depend on boardwalks, which we started transferring into board roads to make the point clearer. But these folks depend on this to get to their community infrastructure. And some of these boardwalks are failing. But individually projects, they're not a very compelling or competitive project for grant funding. But if we bundle them all together and really talk about the role of boardwalks, now I'm combining the two words in one. I don't know how I'm doing that, but it really tells for a compelling story. And so we got a successful grant application for that. So now we're working on a design standard for all boardwalks and board roads throughout the state, and really to kind of help support, and then it'll end up in supporting the reconstruction of some of our boardwalks in multiple communities. And I'm trying to think of how many, but it was a stellar application and a successful one. So I think it goes to the value of having that hub, so we can actually see what these reoccurring needs are. And these were all needs that were community identified.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, next slide, please. I'm just going to breeze through some examples of TIFIA in action, because again, it can be kind of difficult to really understand what we're talking about. So I really like to bring these two examples to the table to illustrate the kinds of things that we're doing. So this first one is actually a project in Washington State with the city of Mount Vernon. Next slide, please. And the city of Mount Vernon is on the I-5 corridor. It's a couple miles, 50 or so miles north of Seattle, and it is considered a rural community, which I know for some of y'all who live in places like Alaska and Montana, you're probably think that's a little funny that we consider Mount Vernon to be rural, but by definition, they are. And the city had this old community center that they wanted to basically revamp and turn into a public library, one of the largest charging stations in the US. I think there's going to be 75 ports, which is, again, the single largest one in the entire US. And a community center that is really a piece of infrastructure that serves multiple purposes for this community. And so next slide, please. And then you're just going to have to click through a couple of them because here we go. So this project is a really great example of how a community was able to basically like layer cake different kinds of funding opportunities together with a TIFIA loan to actually get the project moving. So this is sort of what I was talking about earlier, where in the US, if you're getting federal money for a project, you can only use federal money for 80% of that project. So they have to come up with funding for that additional 20%. So through a combination of state grants and some other local practices, they were able to come up with 33%. And prior to BIL, they were looking at the funding options across the federal government and realized that they probably were not going to be able to use grants to fund the whole rest of the project. And so they were looking into a TIFIA loan, and TIFIA loans can finance up to 49% of the total project costs. So initially, they were planning to take out approximately $26.8 million in loans, and they had ways to repay that. Luckily for them, they were able to successfully apply for other federal funding, which allowed them to reduce their TIFIA loan down to only $11 million, which, having access to that TIFIA capital while they were waiting for the federal funding to come through, because even once you receive an award, it takes a while for DOT to get you the paperwork to actually get you that money. And so they were really able to leverage that TIFIA financing to move the project forward. And I believe construction is almost close to completion. So next slide, please. Oh, next slide. One more. But as I said, this project is maybe not as applicable to communities in Alaska, and that's why I wanted to end with this particular example right here. So this Oklahoma set of projects was basically, I'm originally from Texas and I have driven through Oklahoma a lot. And some of those country roads are really, really narrow and very dangerous. And so the state DOT wanted to widen them slightly and install shoulders on those roads for improved community safety. And they had a bunch of these projects all across the state that they were trying to do. And as I was saying before, a lot of times what a state DOT will do is they'll kind of like wait until it has enough funding in reserve to pay for the match before moving forward with the project. But what they were able to do with TIFIA is they were able to bundle all of these projects together. And so instead of doing one project every couple of years, so it would take 30 years to put all of these together, they were able to bundle them all. They were able to have more of a singular contract that allowed them to build all of these road improvements within, I believe, 3 years. So that is huge, not only cost savings, safety improvements, and also just the benefit of time. So this is one of those really cool projects where all of these are really, really rural communities. And so this is the kind of model that we are hoping we'll be able to find examples of and replication for in the state of Alaska. So with that, I think, next slide, please. Next slide. This is our contact information. I believe we might have time for like 1 or 2 questions, but thank you all for your time this morning.
Thank you. And just pop your hand up. Just to, if you have any questions, just to kind of wrap up on the Mount Vernon Library project, which the Bureau just had a big press release highlighting this as a major case study for innovative finance. It's also an example of the systems integration that I referred to earlier, trying to figure out how you overlay clean energy hubs on our traditional transportation network, whether it's highways, railroads, airports, seaports. Mount Vernon Library is going to have 76 public charging stations. 76, the largest in America. It's a little medium-sized town. And if you own an electric car, like I do, and you've gone to public charging stations and you have a 50% chance that it's going to work, having reliable electric charging stations for personal vehicles, for light delivery vehicles, for long-haul trucking, is really critical. So it's a good example of clean energy on interstate systems. So I think it's a great project. It's in our area. So we're very pleased to have supported it. I think the other comment I want to make, the theme of this conference, both RDC and PNWER, has been optimism, right? It's been, there's new administration, resource development, build it, get her done kind of attitude. There are big obstacles to that. And our funder, the Build America Bureau, interestingly enough, in their charter, in their statute, in the creation of the Build America Bureau, has 2 primary purposes. One is innovative finance. What does that mean? That means public money into private infrastructure or private money into public infrastructure to achieve societal goals. In this case, PNWER's focus is on transportation and energy and the convergence of those. So when you talk about P3s, and Canada, frankly, has done a hell of a lot better job on P3s than we have. If you've ever been to Whistler, the road to Whistler was a public-private partnership. And in time for the Olympics, it was completed quickly. It was a great P3. In America, the reality of P3s is that they tend to be politically controversial because they involve toll roads and a private company operating the toll roads and jacking up the tolls. And there's a lot of pushback on that. Well, in the new world of blending energy and transportation, there are all kinds of opportunities for public-private partnerships. The BIL that we've talked about is $1.2 billion. It expires in 2 years. Trillion, sorry. That's right, federal government, you'd add another level. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a funny name for it, but within it, there is $400 billion of grant and tax credits for private capital to invest in clean energy projects. Goldman Sachs did an analysis, and they're actually thinking that it is going to be closer to $2 trillion of investments by the time the act is completed. There are ways that this administration and the governors, congressional folks, and state legislators can talk to Congress about the reauthorization and using PNWER as an example of how we can blend system integration of transportation and energy and how we can bring private capital to bear. The other obstacle that we've talked about in various forums is permit reform. And it is, interestingly enough, part of the Build America Bureau is to look at expedited project delivery and permit reform. And the reason why they go together is because what we're finding in our almost 3 years of research, field research, is besides the fact that TIFIA and RIF and credit programs are hard to explain, the federal process for infrastructure finance, the application, the notice of funding opportunity, when you have a small government or a tribe, they don't have the staff to figure out how to fill out this grant application. It used to be under 10 pages. They're 40 pages and plus now. And then once you get, if you are successful in getting the grant, you have to go through this torturous process with the Department of Transportation, which was understaffed when the BIL first started, to figure out when you sign your grant and when you get your money. And meanwhile, the time bomb is ticking and inflation is jacking up the cost of your project. So the lesson for the next authorization is streamline the project delivery process. Get it so that it's quick and you allocate the money and they could start construction before capital eats up whatever reserves they have. And then of course the whole permit reform is expedited permit for transportation energy projects is something that's a larger political issue, but it very much affects our country and our two countries. So I think our advice to PNWER leadership from the Accelerator, having worked these projects and struggling with tribal governments that just throw their hands up and say, we can't figure this out, and give credit to the Bureau, recognizing this. They now have special grants that give money to tribes and to consultants that work with tribes just to figure out if the project is feasible economically, environmentally. It may not result in a grant application because the project may not be feasible, but just to incubate and do some hand-holding with tribal governments on how you navigate this federal bureaucracy. And I give them credit for that. So as we develop our collective program, and I mentioned Build Northwest Council with legislators and working with governors and working with congressional members and local agencies, we have to come up with a progressive agenda that removes barriers to infrastructure and expedites permits and blends these multiple silos of federal funding. There's DOE, DOT, there's EPA, and then there's a whole agricultural money and commerce money. it's really difficult to figure out where you might even go in the federal government to figure out how to put the project funding together. But there are great opportunities. If we streamline the process, keep the robust funding, and invite private capital to bring their talent and their resources to make these projects work. So anyway, any other final comments?
Sure. Any questions? Excellent.
Is that a good idea or? Shane, speak up. You, Mary, speak up.
Speaking of the microphone,
So, we've been enjoying the construction of the new administration as it's progressing very rapidly. And yesterday, the announcement of joy was that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy will be heading a new program to find efficiencies in government, like what you're suggesting, and that creative innovation from the geniuses in business sector should help a great deal. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's too early to tell. I just think that there's bipartisan support and has been, for instance, on permanent reform. Permanent reform goes back to George H.W. Bush and continued through Obama and Biden and Trump. There's been a lot of talk about permanent reform and more efficient project delivery. And there's been nibbling at it, a little bit here, a little bit there, but it needs a fundamental restructuring. We're not talking about gutting environmental programs. It's just that when you have multiple federal agencies, for instance, reviewing a project on different timelines based on different criteria, it results in projects not getting funded because you just don't have any predictable measure. There's been a lot of discussion over the years about the so-called 2-year shot clock. You get all your permits together, the federal government gets its act together in terms of its review, and they have 2 years to say yay or nay to the project. That's one reform, and I would suggest that to Mr. Musk. Shane, did you have a comment?
Yeah, no, when it comes to permit reform, you already had me at hello kind of thing. And I think part of this of mapping it out, so that was kind of the gate mapping you did on the application process. When you look at that for advancing a project, that's where you're seeing in multiple levels of jurisdictions. Everybody wants you to do the same thing. They want it in a different format, and you're invariably doing the 5th environmental report for the 20th time. And then it gets kicked back because they like it in cornflower blue rather than deep purple orange or some stupid thing that they have. So the fact that you can map this out and span those to help simplify an over complex process, that is going to be beneficial to a number of areas. And then through the Accelerator program, I think the application of that, then Bruce and I mean, you and I have been talking broader, that similar little small model can be applied to large, massive infrastructure projects in the same way. And then the other one that's really interesting is by exploring the process and seeing where that trapped capital is. Again, a lot of us as taxpayers, we throw the dollars out there, it sits on the fence and nothing ever happens with it. And you literally have to have people that become grant hunters to go hunt grants down for you because no one can make common sense of it. So overall, yep, like it. I think we can look at how we broaden that to a bigger perspective as well and use it as a pilot project, quite frankly. So I'm pretty encouraged.
Okay, we've got tourism coming up, fun topics.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.